You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, Donald Trump was dealt a brutal blow by all 11 D.C. appeals court justices, including 3 judges who he himself appointed. So, can you walk us through what happened here?
Yeah, this one kind of flew under the radar, but it's actually pretty consequential. So we know that Judge Tanya Chutkin, who is presiding over the DC election interference case, put a gag order in place on Donald Trump. Not surprisingly, Donald Trump appealed to the DC Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, and a 3-judge panel unanimously concluded that the gag order will stay in place. It's lawful, it's constitutional, and it's appropriate. So Donald Trump, undeterred, decided to file a motion for what's called en banc review. In other words, when a 3-judge panel of an appellate court issues an opinion, the losing party can ask all of the appellate court judges who sit on that court of appeals to rehear the case, to revisit the case. On the DC Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, there are 11 appellate court judges, and all 11 considered Donald Trump's request to have the case reheard en banc, full court. Not a single one of the judges voted in favor of rehearing the case. It was just a unanimous smackdown. And perhaps most importantly, 3 of those 11 judges were appointed by Donald Trump himself. And even the Trump appointed judges said, in substance, talk to the hand. We are not going to revisit this case.
I feel like this is an inevitability here, but do you expect that we'll see this appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court?
Yes, but I suspect it will go nowhere. There's good news, and then there's good news. Rarely can we say that when it comes to Donald Trump litigation.
Right.
First of all, now that the full appellate court has said we're not going to hear this, he can try to appeal it to the Supreme Court. But the first good news is there is no constitutional issue involved here that the Supreme Court should feel compelled to take on. So I suspect I'm going to put my $1, my betting limit, I'm going to put my $1 on the Supreme Court refusing to accept the gag order case for review. But if they do accept it for review, here's the other good news. It is not like the immunity issue, right, where Donald Trump said, I have absolute presidential immunity against prosecution, because that kind of an issue, when it gets appealed, it puts a stop to the trial court proceedings. That's why we've been treading justice water here, waiting for the appellate court to resolve the absolute immunity claim. Well, a gag order, because it is not what we call a case dispositive issue. In other words, if Donald Trump wins the immunity claim, the case is done. It gets thrown out. It's over. It's case dispositive, right? It ends the case. The gag order is not an issue like that. It simply, will determine whether Donald Trump can run his mouth and endanger the witnesses and the court staff and the prosecutors or not. So even if the Supreme Court takes it for review, which I think unlikely, the trial will continue to move forward. But of course, we're still waiting on the absolute immunity claim to be resolved. So I am far less concerned with the gag order aspect of this appeal, but I really would like to see the appellate court in DC resolve that absolute immunity claim so we can get the trial back on track and moving toward the trial date.
It's crazy the steps that Donald Trump will go to just to be able to endanger the judge and the court staff, like appealing this thing all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, just because he's that desperate to run his mouth and put these people's lives in danger. But I guess it shouldn't come as a surprise at this point. Glenn, are you able to glean anything bigger picture here from the fact that even the judges who he himself appointed were willing to shut him down?
Yeah, great question. I have asked myself, is this foreshadowing that all 11 of the appellate court judges basically just shot down a Donald Trump appeal or a request for a rehearing? It gives me minimal reason to be optimistic that even Trump-appointed judges can make appropriate, lawful calls when it comes to an issue involving Donald Trump, the president that appointed them to the federal bench. But because the substance of the two issues is very different, right? The gag order is very different from the absolute immunity claim. I don't think we can read too much into this unanimous denial and say that it's going to carry over or it's going to apply to the appellate court's decision on the absolute immunity issue. But it does give me a little bit of reason to be optimistic.
Yeah. Can you offer a reminder here? Has Trump violated his gag order in the Washington, D.C. case since it's been in place?
Not that we have heard of, certainly not directly and expressly and overtly. And if he had, even though the trial case is on pause, Judge Chutkan made clear, she put on the record, I will retain jurisdiction to administer the gag order that I put in place. And we have heard nothing about her issuing what's called a show cause order, which would be directing Donald Trump to come back into court and show cause why he shouldn't be held in contempt if he violated the gag order. We haven't seen any of that litigation in recent weeks. So the good news is it looks like maybe the gag order is having the desired effect because Donald Trump, at least in that case, is not threatening witnesses, is not threatening court staff, is not threatening prosecutors. Of course, he's kind of had his hands full elsewhere, being tried in other cases.
He's been busy threatening Nikki Haley and threatening like whoever else is right in front of him at that moment in time.
It seems like he has a new perceived enemy a day, doesn't he?
That's right.
His attention is always being distracted. Like, okay, who do I have to threaten and harass and intimidate today?
Yeah. Well, Glenn, usually, we've spoken about this before, but usually there is a little bit of leeway built in where Donald Trump could, for example, violate the terms of a gag order once or twice, and we'll just get a slap on the wrist and maybe a light sanction before it becomes like a more severe sanction after that. Because this thing is getting so much attention, and because it's so obvious now that a gag order is like front and center, are we at a place where Trump could automatically or immediately face a more severe punishment if the gag order is upheld and he violates it? Like, this gag order isn't flying under the radar. It's not like Donald Trump is going to forget that it's there because so much attention is being paid to it right now. I mean, it's the subject of an appeal likely all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So does that kind of negate that little free pass that he would have otherwise gotten?
It's such a great observation that, everybody is sort of going to extraordinary lengths on both sides of this gag order equation and in the courts, the appellate court, the trial court, perhaps the Supreme Court, that it would seem a bit incongruous, if I can use that big word, if there's a violation for Judge Chutkan to then say, I'm going to give you a free pass. I mean, after all of the efforts that have been undertaken by everybody regarding this gag order. So I actually think that you're right. I think the first direct violation of it will probably result in swift and definite and perhaps harsh punishment and sanctions from Judge Chutkan. At least I sure hope so, because this gag order is to promote the due administration of justice. So, letting Donald Trump get away with a minor violation or two will run absolutely contrary to the very purpose of the gag order.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll obviously stay on top of this as it continues to work its way through the court system. And hopefully, as you said, it'll be upheld and Donald Trump won't be able to put the lives of court staff and the judge herself at risk here. So with that said, for anybody watching, if you want to stay on top of this, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.